They cheered as she spoke, convinced that her words were undeniable truth. Emily Carter, a young, passionate activist, stood before the crowded debate hall, declaring that older generations were holding society back. She argued that those over 50 should no longer have a say in shaping the future. The students roared in agreement, fueling her confidence. She believed no one could challenge her, until a single figure stood up from the audience. The moment his face became visible, a hush spread across the room. Keanu Reeves, the legendary actor known for his wisdom and humility, stepped onto the stage, unshaken by the fiery debate. Emily smirked. "Let me guess," she said mockingly, "you're here to defend the past?" But what he said next changed everything. In an age where generational divides are growing wider, where young voices demand change and older voices seek to be heard, one simple question remains. Can true progress be made by erasing the past? What unfolded in that debate hall was more than just an argument. It was a moment of reckoning. Keanu Reeves, without anger or ego, delivered a response so powerful, it left even his fiercest opponent questioning her own beliefs. This is the story of how a single speech silenced a room and forced an entire generation to reconsider everything they thought they knew. The debate hall was packed. Hundreds of students filled the auditorium, eager for what promised to be one of the most controversial discussions of the year. The energy in the room crackled like static before a storm. Some students leaned forward in their seats, their eyes gleaming with excitement, while others scrolled on their phones, waiting for the fireworks to begin. At the center of it all stood Emily Carter, a rising star in activism. Just 22 years old, she had already made a name for herself with bold speeches and unapologetic opinions. Today, she was here to make her most daring argument yet. She stepped forward, scanning the audience with confidence. The microphone hummed as she leaned in. "We need to talk about a problem that no one seems brave enough to admit," she began, her voice sharp and deliberate. "And that problem is the older generation." A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. A few students exchanged glances, but most nodded in agreement. Emily smirked, emboldened by their response. "The truth is," she continued, "we are being held back by outdated ideas, by people who refuse to let go of power, by those who claim to have experience, but refuse to adapt to the modern world. How can we, the next generation, fix the mess they've made if they won't step aside and let us lead?" Applause erupted. Some students cheered. Emily had expected resistance, but so far, the audience was eating out of the palm of her hand. She pressed on, her words gaining momentum. Politics, business, education, science. In every field, the same faces make the same decisions, refusing to listen to new voices. They say experience matters, but what good is experience if it keeps us stuck in the past? We don't need people who grew up in a world without the internet making decisions about our digital future. We don't need people who still write checks deciding how our economy should run. And we definitely don't need people who grew up in a time where women and minorities had fewer rights telling us how to move forward. More applause, a standing ovation. She could feel the heat of the spotlight, the way the crowd hung on her every word. She had them. "So I propose a solution," she declared. "We put an age limit on leadership. Anyone over 50 should step down from decision-making roles. We need fresh ideas, a clean slate. We need progress, and we won't get that if we keep dragging the past with us." The room erupted. Students clapped, whistled, and cheered. Some pounded on the tables in agreement. Emily grinned. This was exactly the reaction she had wanted. She felt invincible, unstoppable. But then, a single figure stood up from the audience. At first, no one noticed. But as he stepped into the light, whispers spread like wildfire. Keanu Reeves. Emily's smirk barely faltered. She folded her arms, tilting her head. "Let me guess," she said with mock amusement. "You're here to defend the past?" The room hushed. Every eye turned to Keanu as he walked toward the stage, calm and composed. He took his place at the podium, letting the silence linger before finally speaking. What he said next changed everything. Keanu Reeves stood at the podium, his hands resting lightly on the edge. He didn't rush to speak. Instead, he let the silence settle, watching the faces in the audience, some eager, some skeptical, some waiting to see if he could possibly have anything meaningful to say against the passionate young activist before him. Finally, he took a slow breath and spoke. Keanu shook his head, unfazed by her challenge. "No, Emily," he said gently. "I'm saying that the past informs the future. That knowledge, experience, and wisdom don't lose value just because they come from someone older." Emily exhaled sharply. She wasn't used to being challenged in this way. Usually, when she debated, she overwhelmed her opponents with passion and conviction. But Keanu wasn't getting defensive. He wasn't trying to overpower her. He was simply reasoning with her. And the worst part? His words made sense. Keanu continued, his voice steady but powerful. "Tell me, Emily, do you think the world today is perfect?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Of course not," she scoffed. "That's why we need change. And you believe young people are the only ones who can create that change?" She hesitated. "I think we have the best chance of fixing what's broken." Keanu nodded. "You're right that young people are the driving force of change. Every movement, every revolution, every breakthrough has always started with the energy and passion of the young. But let me ask you this. What happens when you remove wisdom from that equation?" Emily furrowed her brow. Keanu's eyes scanned the crowd, making sure they understood the weight of his next words. "Passion without wisdom is reckless. Energy without guidance is directionless. You need both to make real, lasting change. You don't have to agree with the past, but you have to understand it. Because if you don't, you're not moving forward. You're just repeating old mistakes in a new way." A few students murmured in agreement. Some exchanged looks, the realization sinking in. Emily clenched her jaw. She wanted to fight back, to prove him wrong, but she couldn't ignore the way his words rang true. Keanu took a step closer, his presence commanding yet calm. Think about the greatest leaders in history. Martin Luther King Jr. learned from Mahatma Gandhi. Malala Yousafzai was inspired by past human rights activists. Even the most revolutionary figures didn't start from nothing. They built on the foundations of those who came before them. Emily swallowed hard. The confidence she had walked in with now felt more like stubbornness than certainty. Keanu's voice softened, but his words carried more weight than ever. If we cast aside the wisdom of those who've lived before us, we don't advance. We lose something vital. The world doesn't need young or old. It needs both. It needs passion and experience, energy and wisdom, change and stability. That's how real progress happens. The audience was no longer silent in uncertainty. They were silent in understanding. And for the first time, Emily Carter, the girl who always had a sharp response, always had the perfect comeback, had nothing to say. The debate was over. The fiery energy that had filled the room at the start had transformed into something else, something heavier, something deeper. The students who had once cheered Emily's words without question now sat quietly, their expressions thoughtful, their perspectives subtly shifting. Emily stood at her podium, gripping its edges as if anchoring herself to something solid. Her mind was racing. She had walked into this debate so sure of herself, so convinced that her argument was unshakable. But now, as she looked at the audience, her audience, she could see the hesitation in their eyes. She turned back to Keanu, who stood calmly, his expression patient. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't celebrating a victory. He had only done what he set out to do, share a truth that many had forgotten. Emily exhaled, finally breaking the silence. Her voice was quieter now, less sharp, less certain. "I still believe young people deserve a bigger voice," she said, as if trying to hold on to her argument, even as it crumbled beneath her. "We do need change. We do need new perspectives." Keanu nodded. "You're absolutely right," he agreed. "And we need people like you to push for that change. But pushing for change doesn't mean pushing away wisdom. It means using it, learning from it, making it better." Emily was quiet for a moment. She felt the weight of the debate, the weight of her own words pressing down on her. Then she did something no one expected. She took a step toward Keanu and extended her hand. The audience collectively held their breath. Keanu, without hesitation, took her hand in his, shaking it firmly. Emily looked up at him, and for the first time there was no defiance in her gaze, only understanding. "I underestimated you." she admitted. I thought you were just here to defend the past. I didn't expect you to make me actually think about it. Keanu smiled. That's what real debate is supposed to do, he said. It's not about proving who's right, it's about learning from each other. She nodded slowly. I guess I have more to learn than I thought. Keanu's response was simple. We all do. The students, one by one, began to clap. Not the wild, uproarious applause that had filled the hall before, but something more meaningful. Some still held on to their original beliefs, but many now saw things differently. Perspectives had shifted. Minds had opened. And for Emily Carter, the young activist who had once believed that the past had no place in the future, something had changed forever. Because real progress doesn't come from erasing the past. It comes from understanding it.